Every night, a small puppy waited outside the hospital. The small creature was barely noticeable, its frail form often overlooked in the busy surroundings. It shivered in the cold, its tiny body pressing against the concrete, seeking any warmth it could find. The puppy was alone, abandoned by a world that seemed too busy to care. Yet, every evening, without fail, it returned to the same spot, curling up beneath the harsh lights that flickered around the hospital's entrance. No one seemed to notice. No one seemed to understand. But for those who did, the puppy's silent vigil raised 1,000 questions. Dr. Raymond had worked as a physician in the hospital for many years, a compassionate doctor known for his dedication. He had seen all manner of life and death in the sterile, often harsh environment of the hospital. From joyful births to heartbreaking goodbyes, he had experienced the full range of human emotion. Yet, despite the many challenges he faced, he had never been prepared for the sight of a small dog sitting alone in the cold. One evening, after a grueling 12-hour surgery, Dr. Raymond stepped out of the operating room, exhausted and drained. His tired eyes wandered across the hospital grounds as he walked to his car. That's when he saw the puppy. It was curled up on the cold, hard ground, trembling against the chill. The sight of it struck something deep inside him. He had seen pain before, on the faces of his patients, in the eyes of their families, but the sadness in the puppy's eyes was different. There was something pure and innocent about it, something that spoke of a loyalty and grief too heavy for such a tiny creature. Compelled by a deep sense of empathy, Dr. Raymond stopped in his tracks, his hand resting on the emergency door. For a moment, he simply watched the puppy, unsure of what to do. The little dog looked up at him, its wide, brown eyes filled with a silent plea. It wasn't just that the puppy was cold or hungry, it was something more. There was a sadness in those eyes, a sense of waiting, as if the puppy was holding on to hope for something that might never come. The doctor's heart ached as he took a step closer. "Hey, little one," Dr. Raymond whispered softly, crouching down near the puppy. "What are you doing out here?" The puppy's ears perked up at the sound of his voice, but it didn't move closer. It stared at Dr. Raymond with an intensity that spoke volumes. There was no wagging of the tail, no sign of excitement, just a quiet, reserved trust. Dr. Raymond extended his hand slowly, but the puppy remained still, watching him with the same sorrowful expression. Dr. Raymond sighed, standing up and taking a step back. "I don't know what you're waiting for, but I'll be back tomorrow," he said softly before walking away, his mind already filled with thoughts of the little dog. The following days passed, but Dr. Raymond couldn't stop thinking about the puppy. Each time he left the hospital, he would look for it. He noticed how the dog would perk up its ears at the sound of footsteps, hoping someone would approach, but no one did. The puppy would retreat back to its spot, a resigned look in its eyes. It never moved. It simply waited. Dr. Raymond's heart grew heavier with each passing day. The puppy's determination to stay in the same spot, night after night, spoke to him in ways he couldn't explain. Why was it there? What was it waiting for? Was it abandoned, or was it waiting for someone to return? Unable to ignore his curiosity, Dr. Raymond decided to do something about it. He returned to the hospital one evening armed with a blanket and a bowl of water. He knew it wasn't much, but it was a start. When he approached the puppy this time, the dog didn't shy away. It allowed him to come closer, its big brown eyes still filled with that same sadness. Dr. Raymond gently wrapped the blanket around the dog, feeling its ribs beneath the thin fur. It was clear that the puppy hadn't been eating well. As he sat beside the puppy, Dr. Raymond couldn't help but wonder who it had belonged to. Had someone dropped it off, or had it run away? Was it simply lost, searching for its home? The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. That night, Dr. Raymond decided to stay and observe. He couldn't leave yet. He had to know more. He watched as the puppy stayed still, waiting for something, for someone. Every time the emergency doors opened and someone walked out, the puppy would lift its head, its ears twitching, its eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for someone in particular. But when no one stopped, when no one even noticed the dog, it would lower its head again and return to its spot. It was waiting for something, but what? The next morning, Dr. Raymond asked one of the hospital security guards, Elias, if he had noticed anything unusual about the puppy. Elias was an older man who had been working at the hospital for many years, and he knew the ins and outs of the place like the back of his hand. "I've seen that dog every night," Elias said, nodding gravely. "At first, I thought it was just another stray looking for food, but there's something different about it. It's not just wandering around. It's waiting. I think it's waiting for someone who's not coming back." Dr. Raymond felt a tightness in his chest as he heard those words. He had already suspected as much, but hearing it from someone else made it feel more real. The dog was waiting for someone. Someone who was no longer there. "That's what I think too," Elias continued, his voice soft. "You'd be surprised how many stories come through these doors. Not all of them have happy endings." Dr. Raymond couldn't shake the thought of the puppy's sadness. It had been there for weeks, possibly longer, never leaving, always waiting. Who had it been waiting for? Could it have been a patient from the hospital? Could it have been someone who had passed away, leaving the dog behind? Later that evening, Dr. Raymond enlisted the help of Clara, a nurse known for her love of animals. Clara had always been kind and gentle, and Dr. Raymond knew she would be willing to help. Together, they dug through the hospital's records, searching for any sign of a patient who might have had a dog. After hours of searching, Clara suddenly stopped. She pointed to a file. "Look at this," she said, her voice filled with shock. "This man, Mr. Harvey, he was admitted a month ago after a stroke. He lived alone, and according to his neighbors, he had a dog. A little dog that was his only companion." Dr. Raymond's heart sank as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Mr. Harvey had passed away during treatment. The puppy wasn't just waiting for anyone. It was waiting for Mr. Harvey, its owner, who had come to the hospital in hopes of getting better, only to leave the world behind. The dog hadn't understood. It had followed Mr. Harvey here, believing that its owner would come back. But Mr. Harvey was gone, and the puppy didn't know how to let go. Feeling a sense of deep responsibility, Dr. Raymond decided it was time to act. The next evening, he returned to the puppy with Clara. Together, they sat beside it, speaking gently. Slowly, the puppy began to trust them. It inched closer to Clara, who was the first to stroke its fur. "You've been so brave," Clara whispered. "But it's time to find you a new family, little one." Dr. Raymond agreed. He couldn't bear the thought of the puppy waiting outside alone any longer. With great care, they managed to coax the dog into a carrier and bring it inside the hospital. Clara promised to care for the puppy and find it a forever home. Over the next few weeks, the puppy flourished. Under Clara's loving care, it grew stronger, its coat grew shiny, and its eyes sparkled with life. Dr. Raymond visited often, watching as the little dog began to heal. The puppy had been through so much, and yet it had shown such incredible strength. One day, Clara called Dr. Raymond with exciting news. After contacting local shelters and posting the puppy's story online, Clara had found a family for the dog. An elderly couple who had recently lost their own dog heard about the puppy's loyalty and sadness. They immediately felt a connection to the little dog and were eager to offer it a loving home. Dr. Raymond felt a bittersweet joy as he watched the puppy leave with its new family. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The puppy had finally found peace, surrounded by love. As the days passed, Dr. Raymond's mind often wandered back to the puppy, especially after long shifts at the hospital. The pup's perseverance haunted him, following him through the sterile hallways of the hospital, past the busy nurse's station, and into the quiet solitude of his office. It wasn't just the image of the dog sitting alone in the cold that stayed with him, it was the profound sense of loyalty that had captivated him. Despite being abandoned, despite the harsh environment of the hospital and the city around it, the puppy never moved from its spot. It stayed, its faith unwavering, and that was something Dr. Raymond found both tragic and beautiful. Each evening, as the hospital's emergency doors swung open with the arrival of new patients, Dr. Raymond would pause for a moment, searching the crowd for the little dog. He began to grow accustomed to its nightly vigil, and a strange bond developed between him and the puppy, even though they had never exchanged more than a few words. It was as if the dog understood his weariness, its silent presence offering him a form of unspoken comfort in the chaos that often surrounded the hospital. Despite his growing attachment to the puppy, Dr. Raymond resisted the urge to take the dog home. There were many reasons for this. As a doctor, he understood the responsibilities and commitments that came with caring for another living being. He had his own life, his long hours, and the unrelenting demands of his job. But even with all of these practical considerations weighing on his mind, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something needed to be done. He couldn't simply allow the puppy to continue living on the streets, exposed to the dangers of the city, alone and waiting for someone who was never going to return. The little dog deserved better. One evening, after another exhausting shift, Dr. Raymond decided that enough was enough. He couldn't wait any longer to act. He gathered his belongings and, as he left the building, he made his way to the spot where the puppy usually rested. This time, the dog was not there. Dr. Raymond's heart sank. The puppy's absence was unsettling, and the space where it had once been felt eerily empty. He scanned the area, searching the shadows. The night seemed to stretch on forever, filled with the noises of the city, honking cars, the clatter of distant footsteps, the hum of neon signs. But there was no sign of the little dog. He returned to the emergency entrance the following night, hoping to find the puppy waiting in its usual spot. To his relief, the dog was there again, curled up against the cold concrete. Dr. Raymond's heart swelled with emotion as he approached, and this time, he didn't hesitate. He reached down and gently scooped the puppy into his arms, cradling it close. The dog was light, its body trembling in his embrace. There was no resistance, no struggle, just quiet trust. The puppy whimpered softly, as though grateful for the warmth Dr. Raymond offered. He carried it inside, the little body nestled against his chest as if it had finally found the safety it had been searching for. The staff at the hospital glanced up in surprise as Dr. Raymond passed, the small dog tucked into his coat. He knew that they must have noticed the puppy's nightly presence, but no one had said anything. It was as if the dog had become a part of the hospital's silent rhythm, a ghost of sorts, wandering the halls of the emergency ward. When he reached his office, Dr. Raymond set the puppy down on the floor, allowing it to explore its new surroundings. The dog was still thin, its ribs visible beneath its fur, but it was full of life. It sniffed around, its eyes darting from one corner of the room to the next, taking in everything with wide-eyed curiosity. For the first time since he had seen it outside the hospital, the puppy seemed to relax. It settled down near the heater, curling up in a tight ball, its eyes fluttering shut. Dr. Raymond watched the dog for a long time, deep in thought. He had done the right thing by bringing it inside, but the question of its future still weighed heavily on his mind. What would happen to the dog now? Over the next few days, Dr. Raymond made sure the puppy had food and water. He found a bed for it in the corner of his office and began to take better care of it. Despite his exhaustion, he made it a priority to check on the dog every time he passed his office. He was growing more attached to it than he had anticipated, and he found himself speaking to it as if it were a patient, offering words of comfort and encouragement. The puppy, in turn, seemed to respond to his presence, following him around the office and wagging its tail when he returned after long hours of rounds. One evening, Clara, the nurse who had helped Dr. Raymond investigate the puppy's past, stopped by the office. She had been busy with her duties, but when she saw the little dog curled up in the corner, her heart melted. She walked over slowly, kneeling down to get a closer look. "You've been taking good care of him," she remarked softly, stroking the puppy's fur. "He's doing better already." Dr. Raymond smiled. "I think he's finally starting to feel safe." Clara sat down across from him, her expression thoughtful. "Have you figured out what to do with him yet? He's getting attached to you, and I can see that it's not just about giving him food. He's not just a stray, Raymond. He's been through something that you and I can't fully understand." Dr. Raymond nodded slowly, deep in thought. Clara was right. The puppy wasn't just some random dog. It had a history, a past that was intertwined with someone's life. And that someone was gone. Dr. Raymond couldn't shake the image of the dog waiting outside the hospital, its eyes scanning the faces of everyone who passed, hoping beyond hope that its owner would return. "You're right," he said quietly. "I can't just let him go. He deserves a home, a family. But I don't know if I can be that family." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "I'm not sure I'm the right person for him," Dr. Raymond admitted, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I work long hours, and I'm constantly on call. I can't provide him with the attention he deserves." Clara smiled kindly. "Raymond, sometimes it's not about having the perfect situation. Sometimes, it's about doing what's right in the moment. He's already found a place in your heart. You just need to let him find a place in your life." Dr. Raymond looked at Clara, feeling the weight of her words. The truth was, he didn't know if he was ready to adopt the puppy, but he knew he couldn't let it stay in the hospital forever. It needed a home, and it needed someone who would love it the way it had loved its previous owner. The next few days passed in a blur of work, but Dr. Raymond's mind was never far from the puppy. He found himself thinking about the little dog constantly. Its loyalty, its sadness, its quiet strength, it was all too much to ignore. Dr. Raymond began to wonder what the future would hold for both of them. Could he provide a home for the dog, despite his demanding career? And, more importantly, could he bear the idea of the puppy waiting outside the hospital forever, not knowing where it truly belonged? Dr. Raymond's heart was heavy with indecision. He knew what he needed to do, but it wasn't going to be easy. The hospital had become a place of solace for him, a place where he had dedicated his life to helping others. But now, there was something more. There was a little dog that had found its way into his life, one small step at a time. And Dr. Raymond knew that no matter how hard it might be, he couldn't turn his back on it.